Hello, everyone. I think we will get started. My name is Shaun Dacey. I am the director here at Richmond Art Gallery. Richmond Art Gallery is situated on the traditional and ancestral territory of the Hunkaminam-speaking peoples. This is a language spoken by Musqueam and many other nations along the Fraser River Delta here in the Lower Mainland of British Columbia. Richmond Art Gallery, here at Richmond Art Gallery, we seek to reflect on and present projects that reflect on the history and context of Richmond. Richmond is a place constructed on colonial values, a site of land transformation and extraction for capitalist and settler gain, a site of dispossession of land and property, including the internment of Japanese Canadians in World War II. And now it is a site of rapid real estate development and really a hub for our multitude of Chinese communities here in the Lower Mainland. And it's with these contexts, I feel these contexts really connect to our talk tonight. I'm really excited that we have Su-Ying Lee here. And she's a curator I've admired for many years, and the way that her projects unpack and tackle colonial histories and transgressions. And she's our current exhibition, A Small But Comfortable House and Maybe a Dog by Amy Ching-Yan Lam. Su-Ying is the curator of this show, and it's been such a privilege to work with her on that. If you are in the Lower Mainland, you have a few more days to check out the show. If you do not, I'll put some links in the chat. Su-Ying has, we just published a curatorial response to the exhibition by Su-Ying that you can download off of our website. We have an interview with Amy Lam on our YouTube page and a described tour of the exhibition on our YouTube page. So those are all ways that you can connect to our exhibition. I'll tell you a bit more about Su-Ying before I invite her to join us and speak. Su-Ying Lee is an independent curator. She's also worked in institutions across Canada, including the Museum of Contemporary Canadian Art, the Justina M Barnicke Gallery, and the Art Gallery of Mississauga. Her projects have taken her across Canada, in Hong Kong, Mexico City, and Quezon City in Metro Manila. And we are very excited that she also completed a project in Richmond, BC. This is also a full circle moment for me. Su-Ying and I go way back. We were undergrad students together, and it's been a real honor and privilege to work with a friend and a colleague over the past few months on this project. And I'm really excited tonight as she's going to share a bit about this current show and her research in general and some upcoming projects she's working on. We are recording this talk. We will edit it and put it on YouTube. So please tell your friends to watch it because it will be really great. And please leave questions in the Q&A section or in the chat, and we will save time at the end for that. But at this point, I welcome Su-Ying to join us and chat with us.
Thanks, Shaun. I can't believe it's the last days of the exhibition already. I just need a moment to share my screen. So although I'm presenting this talk through the Richmond Art Gallery, which is situated on the unceded territories of the Hunkaminam speaking peoples, I'm joining from Toronto, the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is today the home to many Indigenous people from around the world. I'm a settler who lives on the land covered by Treaty 13, as well as other unceded and currently contested land. It's also known as Dish with One Spoon territory. I include this information about Treaty 13 because it reminds me of the relationship between my recent curatorial work, which I'll speak about after speaking about Amy's exhibition, and land. It's been my honor to work with Amy Ching-Yan Lam on her first solo exhibition. I've been enriched by her perspective as an artist and advocate for various communities and individuals. In addition to being a visual artist, Amy is a writer. I highly recommend reading her work, including Ludi Goes to Heaven, which there are copies of available for browsing in the exhibition, and the recently published Baby Book. I think you'll find similarities in her use of visual language and poetic language. Giving you a sense of how long exhibition making can take, I believe we first began talking about this exhibition in 2018. A lot of time is necessary to develop meaningful ideas into artworks and meaningful relationships, like the one that formed between Amy and HaeAhn, in part over the pandemic, leading to Oopsie Compound, a series of sculptures in the show. HaeAhn also contributed a great deal to other aspects of how the work as a whole communicated through placement. Amy also paid meaningful attention to context in ways that involved activities outside the gallery. The title of this exhibition comes from a text, Me in the Future, that Amy Ching-Yan Lam wrote at age 11 and put in this time capsule, speculating by the age of 25, she'd be married, have a career, and a small but comfy house, and maybe a dog. The period around the creation of the time capsule in the mid-90s is a formative one for Lam. In the exhibition, we can see this expressed through writing from that time. The writing demonstrates a consistency in the artist's values, but also allows us, viewers, to project our younger selves, maybe laughing and cringing about both who we were and have become. These glimpses of childhood are offered with what feels to me like uninhibited generosity. And I, maybe you, would certainly hesitate to put the thoughts of my younger self in an exhibition visited by so many, whether friends or strangers. Amy and HaeAhn made this fountain in response to a feng shui reading by Sherman Tai, whose connection to the exhibition is that he was a student of Dr. Kwok-Chu Lee, whose collection at the Richmond Public Library is featured in this exhibition. The reading influenced various aspects of the exhibition. Sherman was solving the problem of the column outside the entrance to the Richmond Art Gallery. The column is somewhat of an unwelcoming obstruction, distracting from a view into the art gallery. Sherman related the fish sculpture in the building's atrium to water, suggesting that a water feature would lead people into the gallery. In their own interpretation, the artist selected the most expensive faucet and the cheapest cabinet available at Home Depot as components. The mismatch of the materials and the malfunction of the water, bypassing the sink into the provisional garbage bucket, suggests themes addressed in the exhibition. Very brief video. Particularly themes around housing inadequacy. The fountain reminds me of what people call a landlord special, a makeshift repair or build that is poor in quality. Think about a landlord using duct tape for a repair that requires a carpenter. The sound of the water landing in the bucket and the visually curious, oddly placed fountain do create an attraction. The fountain also required a bit of fine tuning during installation. It is not possible to miss the fountain. I'm wondering if the next work met with visitor attention. Aside from being quiet, this work was the last to be installed, only requiring a wood block attached to the wall to hold it in place. And the placement of a key ring to complete it. Unassumingly placed near the reception area, this work indicates certain characteristics found in the exhibition. I would call this work unobtrusive, despite its notable appearance. It hasn't even been titled. The oversized hand, repurposed from an incredible Hulk figure, is meaty, kind of grotesque and comical. Like the Hulk, it is ultimately kind. The golden, open, upward-facing palm indicates unguardedness, generosity, and vulnerability. It loosely holds or offers keys, indicating access to a home. It's adorned with items from Amy's childhood. Oops. Oopsie Compound is a fantasy communal home with amenities such as the You Don't Have to Die library, a library in a series of hollow gourds, Below the library is a dining room, the Lost in the Sauce kitchen, with 2 communal tables. The donut tables mean no one is seated at a position that would be considered head of the table, further communicating the communal nature of the living situation. Another amenity is a bathhouse in a dollhouse-style teapot, also an object from Amy Lam's childhood. The compound is a coalescence of Amy's childhood toys and objects found and made by the 2 artists. Along with space for reading and a spa-like bathhouse, residents can be entertained at a cozy shared empty purse theater. And a giant sandal is a sleeping platform. You can't tell from the photo, but the sandal is about 3 feet long. Oopsie Compound is a space that's been built with thoughtfulness for a community's needs, giving residents spaces to think, for pleasure, for nourishment, and rest. When I look more deeply at the playful materials, though, I also perceive necessity, the necessity to make whatever is available somehow work. We are in a crisis of housing unaffordability. Many are forced into near impossible living conditions. Daily survival overtakes reading, resting, and pleasure. Imagining climbing sharp shards of glass to reach the one soft sheepskin blanket laid out for sleeping parallels reality in a cruel way. Kwon and Lam's "you don't have to die in order to make a living" flag is a community maxim that we hope a community such as this can make into a truism. In addition to childhood toys used in many of the works are Lam's writings. The Student Voice was a mock newspaper that Amy and other pupils contributed to in 1995, speculating what news 2015 would bring. For Lam's part, she imagined herself as a vivacious head of a women's rights organization. Lam is able to reason with Queen Elizabeth to allow her to take control of England, first swearing that Lam would not allow corruption or violence. I just want to read the end of Amy's article. She writes, "Of course, I credit all the women on earth too. I first started to get hyped about women's rights in grade 6. The boys always thought they were the best, but I made a promise to myself to show them up, and now I have. Remember, females, we rule. We rule," in all caps. Born in Hong Kong and a settler in so-called Canada, Lam continues to be interested in the history of British colonialism between these places and the lasting effects. Resulting from her research into the ceding of Hong Kong to the British, tea, and the Opium Wars, Amy produced a number of works around a Pekingese dog that was renamed Ludi by Queen Victoria. In popular culture, the spread of opium has been misattributed to China. In truth, China was illegally flooded with opium by the British. The British coveted Chinese tea, but didn't want to pay the price of the product, sterling silver. So the British smuggled opium to China, aiming to create mass addiction, forcing China to accept opium rather than sterling in exchange for tea. During the second resulting Opium War, from 1856 to 1860, several Pekingese dogs from Beijing Summer Palace fell into the hands of British soldiers. Taken back to Britain, the dogs were gifted to elites and aristocrats, including Queen Victoria. This set off a craze for acquiring and breeding the dogs. Owning the dogs not only symbolized proximity to the Chinese imperial court and Queen Victoria, but also British conquest. You can find stories of those desperate to claim a dog and its provenance as authentic, saying they hired someone within China's imperial court to smuggle a dog out of the back door for them. Queen Victoria named her Pekingese dog Ludi after the means of acquisition. In various stories, which may be true or apocryphal about the dog's life in England, Ludi is described as sad, lonely, not socializing with the other dogs in the Queen's collection, homesick and unaccustomed to the food. In Amy and Emerson Maxwell's animation, the unhurried focus is on Ludi's rest in a field of poppies and nothing else. No expectations have followed her there. Hong Kong was ceded to Britain by the Qing dynasty in 1842 at the end of the First Opium War. Despite being a double British subject by way of colonized territories of Hong Kong and Canada, Amy's request to borrow the painting of the Chinese dog for this exhibition was denied by the Royal Collection Trust. Not having the actual painting isn't so important in the end. What stands out is Amy's ability to imagine that the unlikely or impossible is possible. Galleries and museums hold permanent collections, artworks and objects that they own and oversee. Policies and practices allow works from collections to be loaned out only to other galleries and museums. Thinking through ownership, collections, and how they could provide public benefit, Amy was able to work with the Richmond Art Gallery to make a few works from the gallery's collection available for loaning out to any resident of Richmond. The works available to you can be viewed at the library and at the gallery. Amy had been interested in working with the library since we first began talking about the exhibition, and the gallery was equally enthusiastic about strengthening the relationship between the two organizations. Amy brought elements of the Dr. Kwok Chu Lee collection from the Richmond Public Library into the gallery. The collection of over 47,000 objects, including books and artworks, was donated to the library in 2011. Dr. Lee, who had homes in Hong Kong and Richmond, formed a relationship with the gallery when the Chinese population in Richmond was growing, but there were no Chinese language books in the library. The library is working on cataloging the massive donations, so there is currently very limited access. The items you see in A Small But Comfy House and Maybe a Dog will go back into the storage vault following the exhibition, in line to be cataloged. So as mentioned, you've got 3 more days to view the exhibition, and I encourage you to take your time in the final gallery, where well-worn couches from Amy's childhood home are available for you to sit on. The couches in Dr. Lee's porcelain zodiacs are configured into a sundial. In this gallery, the strong relationship between property and time is offered through a kind of embodied experience, from sitting and taking in the objects and surroundings. The calendars on the wall contain stories Amy encountered about real estate over the course of a year. The stories are personal, political, moving, and for many of us, very relatable. You're welcome to flip through the property calendars and read them, and you may find parts of the story about how the couches came to be moved out of the family home. And copies of Ludi Goes to Heaven have been left in the space for visitors to read. The beautiful bank of windows in Gallery 3 enhance it as a space for lingering. Looking at the windows, you'll notice 2 works related to the condo being constructed directly across the street. Like Oopsie Compound, these photos juxtapose a fantasy with reality. They're taken from the Richmond Center condos marketing materials, the aspirational My Private Gardens and Future Friendly. Future Friendly is a marketing term invented to denote wheelchair accessibility, a term that negates the existence and needs of wheelchair users in the present. Disability, we're told, is something that isn't presently a concern, and with the privilege of owning one of these condos, you'll be taking care of it if it becomes one. Ultimately, this room culminates questions about survival, while inviting us to rest, questions about who is allowed to rest and who gets their needs met arise. I'm going to talk a little bit about my own current work now. Tea, opium, and European colonialism are points of intersection between Amy's research and my own. My upcoming exhibition scheduled for 2024 at the Esker Foundation delves into the resonances and repercussions of colonialism and agriculture in a broader way, particularly how European colonial agricultural activities such as bioprospecting, economic botany, and plantation agriculture contributed to institutionalizing race and shaping our perceptions of racial identity, and how racialized people relate to and reconcile with land and botany. As you can see, the definition of economic botany here was taken from Kew Garden's own website, only slightly making reference to the problematics of bioprospecting. Many botanical gardens around the world, with Kew perhaps being the primary, are much like museums that hold stolen culture, violently taken from people who originated the technologies that plants were used for, presenting it out of context. The wisdom and expertise that was capitalized on by European colonizers came from communities that evolved alongside these plants for many generations. Biopiracy erases the original sources of knowledge. In Amy's work, we've touched on the British scheme that involves opium, tea, and the ceding of Hong Kong. India was implicated in the British scheme as well. Before the British colonial period, Indian agriculture was dominated by subsistence farming, organized in small village communities. The farmer usually grew enough food to feed themselves, their families, and the non-agricultural people of the community. Surplus was stored for when later necessary. Forced to switch to growing opium and other crops for export by the British, rural Indian communities suffered from incidents of famine. Agriculture was now controlled for British profit. A system of indentureship was established where agricultural workers would take on debt under the promise of being able to earn enough to pay off the debt and begin to earn a profit. Interest-free advance payments were offered to poppy farmers who could not otherwise access easy credit. With this credit, they paid for rent, supplies, irrigation, and hired workers at a rate higher than the income from the sale of raw opium to the British brought in. They were soon trapped in a web of contractual obligations from which it was difficult to escape. My upcoming 2024 exhibition is still in the planning stages. These are some of the works I've looked at in my research. Under the connecting themes I'm exploring, for example, in the case of this work, the production of racist structures. Once the British had control of Hong Kong and India, medical racism became a tool of control. In Bo Wong and Pan Liu's work, they talk about the theory of miasma. The British, unaccustomed to the tropical heat of Hong Kong, theorized that the illness that they experienced came from the bodies of the Chinese and hung over the island as a miasma, an unhealthy vapor or atmosphere. To clear the air, the British ghettoized and segregated the Chinese and took the cool, breezy highland for themselves. The British condition in India set off a field of medicine that still exists today called tropical medicine. Similarly, it theorized that illnesses such as malaria came from the bodies of the indigenous population, motivating the British to appropriate land and ghettoize Indians. Wang and Liu's work also look at botany, botanical paintings, and the installation includes a reference to the Wardian case. The glass enclosure to the right is the ancestor of the Wardian case. Invented by Dr. Nathaniel Bagshaw Ward, the case was first tested for bringing plant specimens across the ocean in 1833. This case enabled the eventual colonial production of tea, rubber, quinine, and other agricultural products. Quinine, made from the bark of the cinchona plant from the tropical Indian forest of South America, is used as a cure for malaria, allowing the British to expand their empire in the tropics. Like tea, the cinchona bark was smuggled using the Wardian case. Taking tea plants and seeds out of China was illegal. The British tried, but prior to the invention of the Wardian case, the plants and seeds would rot on the long voyage back to England or be eaten by vermin. The British East India Company hired botanist Robert Fortune, who had spent several years in China, sometimes disguised as a Chinese person, and smuggled out other plants to smuggle 20,000 tea plants from China into plantations in India using Wardian cases. Hoiri Minyaja's greenhouse is a designed object in the lineage of the Wardian case. It's meant to foil the agenda of New World expansion and biopiracy. The plants on the exterior wrap are pixelated to block identification and extraction. The greenhouse is covered in a one-way vinyl, protecting the interior from view, while those on the inside can see out clearly, preparing themselves for anyone who may be approaching. In Bo Wong and Pan Liu's miasma plants and export paintings, we see the institutionalization of racism in the field of medicine, overlapping with science and real estate. Sandra Perry's Typhoon Coming refers to the institutions of insurance and banks. The immersive environment features a digitally manipulated image of J.M.W. Turner's 1840 painting, Slave Ship, slavers throwing overboard the dead and dying, typhoon coming on. The original work depicts the drowning of 133 enslaved Africans by the captain of the ship, British ship Zong. to claim compensation for these goods under the salvage clause of the ship's insurance policy. The ship left coastal Africa with more captured Africans than the ship could physically hold, setting the conditions for failure. The insurance claim went to court and was ruled in favor of the owners, who falsely claimed that they were forced to cast the enslaved humans overboard due to a water shortage. Some of the largest insurance firms still in existence in the US sold policies that ensured the enslavers would be compensated if the enslaved were injured or killed. Several banks still in operation accepted enslaved people as collateral for loans. If plantation owners defaulted on loan payments, the bank took ownership of the enslaved. Perry questions the need to celebrate the physical and visual evidence of brutality in Turner's painting that was praised at the time. Hank Willis Thomas's work ties the making of the USA to the exploitation of the people and resources of the African continent. From Perry's work, we can draw a direct relationship between successful insurance companies and banks to the nation. Hank Willis Thomas is an American artist, and the dialogue around enslavement has focused mainly on the USA. As a Canadian, it's also very important to know that there is a false image of Canada being innocent. I think that is the understanding internationally, as one of the American artists I met with for this exhibition didn't know about Canada's involvement. Artist Camille Turner has produced several works looking at various roles Canada played in the enslavement of Africans. Afronautic Research Lab invites the public to consider evidence of colonial Canada's links to and participation in the transatlantic slave trade and its aftermath, including 19 purpose-built ships, slave ships constructed in Newfoundland and Labrador. I think of land not only as terra, but also as a space and place that people have been transported across. In Deborah Jack's Foremothers, the salt of a sea displaced acts as a mineral surrogate for the body, a necessary mineral for life. It also evokes the sea that enslaved Africans were transported across and thrown into, as well as the salt of tears. Cotton can also be seen as a proxy for enslavement in the USA. Dead Zone 4 by Aria Dean takes that primary cash crop and encases it under protective glass. Hidden in the base of the work is a signal jammer, which prevents mobile phones from broadcasting when nearby. This temporary scrambling slows the ability of audiences to market themselves through proximity to Aria Dean, a Black woman, and her work. In recent years, we've seen images of violence against Black people widely circulated in both media and in art. When such images are circulated by non-Black folks who have no personal lived experience of anti-Blackness, often the effect is traumatizing and harmful to Black communities. In Sandra Perry's work, the more recent phenomenon of Black pain going viral can be seen as part of the lineage of Turner's slave ship painting. I like Dean's work for the way that it has us contemplate our relationships to Black identity while withholding trauma porn. One question the work brings to the fore is who gets to represent who and who benefits. Nature Negra, which translates to Black Nature, is a black and white photographic series by Chanel Stone that explores the connection between the Black body and nature within man-made environments. The series features a compilation of environmental portraits staged in urban nature that explores the notion of holding space within one's immediate environment. The photograph, In Search of a Certain Eden, depicts the artist standing in a bed of blooming flowers in front of a school in Brooklyn. Unknown to the artist at the time, the flower is called a plantation lily. Indentured workers were used to replace the enslaved after slavery was abolished. Although we think of indentured workers and originating from India and China, with few opportunities available, some formerly enslaved Africans also went on to become indentured workers. In the 19th century, Indians faced tumultuous political upheaval and famines. As we know, British interference with pre-colonial agriculture contributed to famines. the country was ripe for Britain to further exploit through the system of indenture. China had its own struggles with poverty, famine, and political instability, having experienced significant losses of silver and other resources, first for opium and then as reparations for the Opium Wars. The Opium Wars further broke down the Chinese agricultural economy. The conditions for indentured workers upheld uneven power structures, enlisted them through deception, and though this was meant to replace enslavement, many indentured workers were kidnapped into this labor. Indentured workers were also known as coolies, a pejorative term that some descendants of indentured workers are reclaiming. I don't know for certain where the term coolie comes from, but in Mandarin, coolie means bitter effort and can be understood as bitter or difficult labor. Coolie might also be derived from Tamil or other South Asian languages as a word for wages. By 1917, when the indentured system had been abolished, close to 18,000 Chinese and almost 450,000 Indians had been brought to the British Caribbean, and the system had also been established in Mauritius, Fiji, South Africa, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, and beyond, including the building of railways in the US and Canada. Following abolition, this population of Indian and Chinese workers was scattered across the world. Endel Goshin is an artist who was born in Trinidad and lived in a village that was once a sugarcane field until he immigrated at age 14. The postcard that Goshin references in the middle is a Victorian era postcard known as Coolie Bell postcards. As tourism in the Caribbean islands was being promoted under British colonial rule, the local postcard industry rose to prominence. Owning postcards symbolized a cosmopolitan and well-traveled individual. Like owning a Pekingese dog, it was also a point of pride related to British conquest and colonies. The portraits are entirely controlled by white Europeans. Remember that this was the Victorian era. The women were posed in traditional clothing, exoticized and sexualized, with their arms and feet exposed. The showing of what we now consider a modest amount of skin was scandalous in that area. White women gazing at the images of brown women would have been completely covered themselves. Goshin views the portraits of the women as complicated as his longing for home is. The sugar cane field was his home and is used as the backdrop of the artist's portraits. On the left is a cane portrait of Canadian artist who is originally Chinese from Trinidad, Richard Fung. Goshin has taken portraits in front of the cane backdrop in open public events where any subject is welcome. Like Hank Willis Thomas, Goshin shows us that national borders and areas of land are much more connected than a map would have us believe. Colonial states are built on the exploitation of the global South. We're all implicated. I began this research at the beginning of the pandemic because there was intense racism against Chinese wet markets, demonstrating that many believe their foodways in supermarkets in the West and Europe are superior, or that food choices such as organic, free-range, and specialty diets make people morally superior. The truth is that we're all embedded in the system of extractive industries such as plantation agriculture. Using the COVID-19 pandemic as an example, the practice of industrial monoculture, descended from plantation agriculture, takes away animal habitats, bringing them closer to humans, transmitting diseases between us. That is the end of my talk.
Thanks a lot, Su-Ying. If people have questions, now is the time that they could enter it into the Q&A section or in the chat. But I just wanted to say thank you so much for the work we've done together the past few months, years actually. And it made me think about curating in general and maybe your curatorial practice. There's two things I was really struck by. First of all, and a big thank you. I know Amy is here as well and as a participant tonight, but you know, for us at Richmond Art Gallery to work with a guest curator and obviously a guest artist, and the amount of care and investment in our local community. The fact that the project that you personally connected with Sherman, the feng shui master, that you connected with Wendy at the library, I was interested in your level of investment and interest in the context of a place that you are working in. And I know I think of past projects that you've done, running a video shop, or the project you did in Hong Kong, and kind of really wanting to take the art out of the white cube context and connect it with, the communities that live around it. So it's kind of a question and kind of a comment about your practice, and an appreciation I have about the kind of contextual work and research work that you've done. And then the second part I wanted to mention, was just thinking about different forms of curating and witnessing you working with Amy. I really witnessed the care part of it, the curator as a supporter, an ally, as an artist is embarking on making new work, and in certain ways a collaborator, of someone to bounce ideas off of, and offering a platform of support for an artist. A lot of times we think of curators walking into studios and being like, I like that piece and that piece. And I just feel there's something in your part of your practice is that sort of, especially in this project, has been around supporting and caring for an artist when working with a larger institution as kind of an independent curator. I don't know if you have general thoughts about either of those things. I'd love to hear them, but yeah.
Well, I mean, Amy was responsible for bringing Sherman in, and around the library and connecting to the outside community. That really, again, I would have to credit Amy with. I think that's something that I like to do, is take the artist's lead. Try and start a project with an artist, understanding what their interests are. And I thought that the library might be something that Amy was interested in, because I had visited the building before Amy got a chance to, when you and I first started talking about the project. So I mentioned it to Amy, and I mentioned the Dr. Lee collection to Amy, and she took it from there. I have done works that are situated outside of gallery, or exhibitions situated outside of galleries, because I'm interested in a larger audience and figuring out how art communicates outside the gallery. I'm also, of course, interested in working in galleries, but I enjoy having that option and working in different contexts.
So this project at the Esker, I mean, the artists you're showing us are like preliminary, sort of just giving us a scope of an idea. So I don't know if you mentioned when this show is happening or when we can look forward to seeing it.
It's September to December 2024. And I mean, the artists that I showed you are just a few of the artists that I do want to include in the exhibition, but we're borrowing a lot of the work from other galleries and museums. So hopefully we'll be able to get those.
Nice. Well, you know what? I'm going to say that there are no questions coming from the audience. Maybe I'll wait another few seconds to see if one pops up, but if not, thank you so much, Su-Ying, for your talk today. And I do encourage people to check out the exhibition. In the chat, I left a link to Su-Ying's essay about Amy's project. Everyone have a great evening, and please tell your friends that we've recorded this, and we'll be posting on our YouTube in the coming days or weeks. So thank you so much, Su-Ying.
Good night, everyone.
Bye, everyone.